For reasons pertaining to the powers that be, I have felt the need to police my language a little bit so as to avoid my channel being yeeted from the interwebs and into the void of no return. As a result, we will be using AI-friendly terminology as alternatives for certain terms where appropriate. For a duration of this video, there will be rather hopefully obvious meaning in the terminology that I have chosen to use as the video progresses. Hopefully, it's obvious. Additionally, it is my hope that it's understood that this video is for the purposes of satire, and as such is not to be taken as a declaration of any sort of opinion held by me at Weebo Productions. That being said, the articles and photographs of things in this video are all real, as in I took them from various places across the internet, so do with that information what you will. Lastly, I want to state upfront that I give anyone and everyone unmitigated permission to repost, to mirror, and archive this video for posterity, in the event that it does get taken down by the powers that be. So have fun. 257. We were in a constant state of crisis for just about 2 years, only for that crisis beacon to be so elegantly and subtly shifted to the impending Third World War, which makes this subject of this video about 2 years too late. Oh well. However, Father Time waits for no man, and in about 100 years, my lovely chitlins, we will be due for another large public health crisis to sweep across the planet, confining us to our futuristic sleeping pods with nothing but our adult coloring books, bacon-flavored grasshopper protein substitutes, and non-exclusive sexual life partners that we don't actually like all that much. If we're keeping with centenary traditions, that is. Why pay the New York Times, which you can get for the low price of free here on my channel with the help of your friendly YouTube ad blocker? We only ask that you subscribe and share for your troubles here at Weebo Productions. That's all that it costs. You're getting a much better deal here, in my opinion, and you don't even have to do all of the pesky reading nonsense that they tried to force you to do in primary school. I'm Weebo Jones, and today, ladies, gentlemen, lizard people, and variants thereupon, we are going to discuss my foolproof, tried-and-true, observation-based 5-step guide to surviving the plague. And by we, I mean my business associate, the self-made entrepreneur and esteemed girl boss herself, Sophia Jones, founder of Who Run the World, and author of Grifting for Girls, coming to you live over a Zoom teleconference from her coof bunker at an undisclosed location. Thank you, Weebo. It is an honor to be here, giving this talk to such an inspired audience, both current and future generations. So, technically there are 6 steps in my 5-step plan to survive the Great Panini. However, step 0 is a hidden step only a few of the S-tier gamer bros will have unlocked. Therefore, it stands to reason that only the select few will have the ability to take advantage of step 0. Is it fair? No. Is it morally bankrupt? Well, it's certainly not financially bankrupt. That's not the question I asked Sophia. Is it morally? One of the most key steps in making it out of this Great Panini alive, not just alive, but also at the very peak of civilization, stepping over the vast sea of face masks and crushing the ventilators of the normies to climb to the very top of everyone else, is of course to ensure that you have ample financial backing. Let's say, hypothetically, you are in a position of governmental authority over your fellow countrymen. Let's also say, hypothetically, that one day you get called into a meeting, a debriefing, if you will, about an issue that will, once the debriefing is made public, without a doubt affect the entirety of the nation that you have a hand in governing. The economy, the supply chain, people's day-to-day lives are all about to change dramatically as a result of this debriefing. And, in this hypothetical, let's say that for the better part of several months, corporate news media outlets have spent an overabundance of time convincing your constituents of the relative nothing burger that this great coup is in the grand scheme of things. It thus stands to reason that since you have this advantage of knowledge before that of your constituents, you do the financially sound and responsible thing and reassess your entire investment portfolio. Or if you're smart about it, have your spouse reassess their investment portfolio. Now, I'm not saying you should commit insider trading because that would be an incitement of a crime, but perhaps it would be within your best interest to ask yourself the following question. What would my sitting congressman, woman, womix do in times such as these? And then proact accordingly. And so we move on to the next step in our process. Much like with AA meetings, the first step here is simply the admittance of a problem altogether. We can't reasonably enact any sort of protocol over a problem that doesn't exist officially. So what you're going to do is take every single mainstream news publication that has ever compared the Great Coof 19 to your run-of-the-mill annual runny nose. All of the parties that told you not to panic over a health concern they reported as less deadly than the common cold, and who expressed to you the ridiculousness of any sort of war on cervezas informadas. Everyone who you now considers word as mud, you're going to take them all back. Okay? They've changed. They're not the same person they were when y'all were together. All of the toxic acts trying to sneak back into the sack talking points. Yes, all of them. It doesn't matter that they played fast and loose with the claims. It doesn't matter that now your trust in them has been absolutely shattered. You are going to take them, all of them, and all of their bullcaca back. Because the otherwise plenty of other fish in the sea has been smothered by algorithmic dominance, or they have swam off to pursue a career in NFTs, or perhaps been partially or wholly deplatformed. But never fear, the MSM will always be right there with open arms waiting for you to find out that you can't really do better than them after all, and simply because they won't let you. At least not until the next big crisis comes onto the scene, and then they will, once again, drop the topic like it's hot. And now that we've established that we in fact have a problem, we come to the next problem. That is identifying the problem as a problem and saying not some other lesser problem that is still in itself a problem, but hardly as problematic as the problem that we're focusing on currently. I mean, this exhaustive list of coof symptoms are inclusive of countless other illnesses one could have for any number of reasons. Heck, I get muscle aches from working out too strenuously myself. So, how do we identify what is coof from what is not coof? Early on, the Chinese considered anal swabbing as a viable option, and hence proceeded to use US diplomats as guinea pigs to determine the diagnostic effectiveness of this method, to the horror of the State Department. In fact, it's the opinion of the Chinese government that anal swabbing for the Great Coof is by far the more accurate of methodologies. As the State Department considered this method a little too invasive, it was settled that we would proceed with a less invasive procedure of taking a Q-tip and jamming it into your nose to tickle your brain.
The swab is inserted and placed parallel to the nasal floor and advanced posteriorly to the nasopharynx.
However, it seemed that a select portion of the population were all too eager to embrace that nussy, getting off on the very clinical and not even remotely sexual act of nasal swabbing.
The swab is inserted.
So, in an effort to dissuade the people from taking advantage of the system, as they so often do, we had to take things in a different direction and employ the use of robotic police Fidos, which worked to identify symptoms by scanning one's eyes. However, that was seen as too dehumanizing by members of the homeless population who were disproportionately on the receiving ends of one of these doggo investigations. So, another alternative, less invasive than anal swabbing, less sexually gratifying than the nasal swabbing, yet somehow more humanizing than robot Fido, was developed, or I guess is in development currently, by the Pentagon. So you know how we, the people, keep track of whose animal is who by way of microchip implanted at the base of your beloved pet's neck? Well, this is the same concept. It functions as a check engine light that reads the chemical reactions in your body and only senses if you have an infectious disease, and then, of course, notifies said injectee. Now, I want to make absolutely plain to those in the audience that are more conspiratorially minded, the good DARPA scientists over at the Pentagon, a federal institution who would absolutely in no way ever in a million years misuse their abilities as a federal entity to do anything shady whatsoever, have assured us, we, the people, that these microchips embedded under our skin, constantly monitoring our body's chemical reactions and notifying us if there is cause for concern in an effort to prevent pandemic events before they become an issue, will not, I repeat, will not be utilized as a global positioning system. Also, it wouldn't be injected into people using vaccinations. Once we've gotten the diagnostics taken care of, we had to, of course, determine the best possible way of stopping the spread. There was a mixed bag of results. Initially, we didn't know how exactly the coof spread from person to person. Vladimir proposed the idea of a full hazmat suit, but that was rejected on the notion that it seemed a bit extreme for a virus that only has a 0.5 to 1% infection fatality ratio, according to the WHO at the time of making this talk. The King and Queen of Belgium did their part and busted out the full body gear, designer scrubs, face shields, gloves, masks, the works, which again was rejected, but mainly for not being cost effective. I mean, the goal is, yes, to turn a profit in these trying times, but it wasn't necessarily to render the bulk of the consumer base bankrupt. After all, if your consumer base is bankrupt, they're not going to be buying. Most likely. So Larry had a thought involving a scuba tank, but that was immediately rejected. He was then removed from corporate office with a box of his things and an escort. We don't talk about that. The base idea was a decent one. We just had to adapt it for the financially impaired members of the population. So anyone with a net worth south of, say, 5 million annually. The result was something resembling what I can only describe to you as a loose-fitting bodysuit. It was cost-effective, it was travel-friendly, it was all very exciting stuff. We even got baby Jesus on board as an ambassador decked out in his minion yellow bodysuit.
My baby Jesus is very well protected. He has his hazmat suit, his face mask. Just like I am protected with my face mask. This is a miraculous baby.
Then we sent the boys home because we thought we were done. That was until we did the focus group. We found that the 60 and over crowd were having a problem getting into and out of the bodysuits without falling and breaking a hip, which would, of course, necessitate a life alert notification and an ambulance ride to the ER where they would be just taking up precious space as we waited for them to die already from old age, loneliness, or catching the great coof from their nursing homes. We further learned from the focus group that the bodysuits weren't sexually appealing in the slightest. Beyond that, none of the top brands had anything even remotely similar in their catalog that season, so that's the 18 to 28 demographic. Bye-bye. And that completely tanked the bodysuit idea altogether because, let's be honest, if we can't get the 18 to 28 trend-setting influencer demographic on board with this idea, then it's just not happening. So we went with the more minimalist approach, simplified it to just masking with moderate success. And we made a hefty profit. Our product was sold nearly everywhere, in every nook and cranny, in all walks of life, to all walks of life. It was a success. But this came with some interesting obstacles. We hadn't quite cornered the market. Everyone and their mother, from mom and pops to Walmart to take your pick fancy, came out with a variation of our product. So in an effort to corner the market, we did publish a study regarding the effectiveness of the cloth mask versus the N95. Of course, with the masks themselves, there was a little bit of, a hiccup.
Should we mask over our masks?
Better to be safe than sorry. Next question.
Do we wear masks in our car while we're by ourselves?
Best to do so for the sake of consistency. In fact, do so whenever you leave the house for any reason.
What about when we sit down at a restaurant?
Well, you can't expect you to mask while you're seated. Certainly not.
What about when eating?
Excellent question. Wear it in between bites?
What about when eating out on Valentine's Day?
Oh, especially then.
Do I have to wear it while in a Zoom conference?
Only if you want to, people.
What about when we're playing instruments in our school band?
Yes, even then.
Man, that's going to impede the woodwinds and brass players.
Yes. Well then, what if, here's an idea, we cut small holes in the middle of the mask where the mouth is allowed to pass air between the human and instrument. Excellent. That should do it.
Man, that doesn't really solve the initial problem of minimizing the spread.
You sure? So, we had to take this particular issue. And the boys in the lab did come up with some remarkable ideas. The first was the saxophone condom. Jerry came up with that one, obviously. And then we had a better idea. Truly groundbreaking. Individual standing isolation tents. A genius concept, in all honesty. 100% reusable, which makes these babies eco-friendly. But additionally, completely airtight, which means that if someone happens to break wind or have a smelly day, forgetting their deodorant, no one but the windbreaker, the smelly person, has to deal with that at all. We wanted to expand on the isolation tents idea, market them to a wider demographic than just your schools. We workshopped the idea a little bit, and we came up with two alternatives. The first was the mobile isolation tent, available in a variety of colors beyond the original green. We came out with a sleeker model later that year for the high-end market, and then we marketed it to the more bougie crowd as a microclimate so that they wouldn't have to debase themselves by breathing in the air of the lowly middle class. And then we expanded upon the initial isolation tent idea to be a little bit more socially friendly, while still allowing people to isolate, but together. We pitched it to some restaurants and boom! Outdoor bubble dining. Indoor seating for the outdoors, so you and 6 of your closest friends can hotbox each other's germs. And then we expanded upon the idea again. So once the proper dress code was established for the New World Order, we had to take steps to further mitigate the spread of the coof between parties. See, I'll be upfront with you and say we did initially discuss closing the borders, but then Janice and HR reminded us that such a thing was illegal and racist, I believe she said. So we settled on a blanket 2 weeks, period. 15 days of total isolation for all non-essential members of the public in an effort to slow the spread. So that's basically every business not providing essential services completely shut down. Curfews were imposed on citizens because, as we know, the Great Coof only comes out at night, after all, which obviously had some repercussions, unfortunately, far-reaching ones, as you can imagine, and, of course, wholly unintended. And these repercussions did eventually affect our bottom line. It turns out you can't turn a profit when your customer base is out of work, sitting at home and doing nothing but streaming shows they've already seen before. So we reopened everything back up, sent the kids back to school, enforced rigid social distancing guidelines, upped testing, and told people to self-isolate at home or within their homes. Which, again, had some unintended consequences.
Court records say the 41-year-old pulled into the Pridgeon Stadium drive-through testing site on Monday. They go on to say a witness told police she was gathering information from drivers in line waiting to be tested when she came in contact with Beam, who, quote, confirmed that her son, who had tested positive for COVID, was in the trunk of her car. According to authorities, Beam told the witness the 13-year-old was put there to prevent her from being exposed to COVID while driving. Court records say the witness requested to see the teen. Beam unlatched the trunk, and the child was found lying down. Moments later, that witness called police. In a statement, Cy-Fair ISD said, quote, law enforcement conducted a full investigation resulting in a warrant for her arrest. Thankfully, the child was not harmed, end quote.
I'll be honest about the fact that people weren't super into the idea of quarantining anyway, so we had to get a little bit less idealistic. We created these fun little communities for people. Camps, if you will. Germany obviously took the lead on this, having had extensive experience in mass incarceration of specific groups of people in the past. And then we incentivized people to partake in their quarantines at home, or if they so decided not to, they could do so at our fun little isolation camps, whether they liked it or not. just look how fun they are.
I get to go outside. I'm so incredibly excited. I got my blue wristband, which means that I'm allowed to leave my quarantine room and go for a walk outside in the car park. My scheduled time is in 15 minutes. So I'm gonna take you guys with me.
So we've covered most bases at this point. The last thing we need to worry about is getting people the cure. After all, the New World Order, with its authoritarian-esque mandates and unstable economy, is highly volatile by nature and will not sustain itself for long. The people will only remain compliant as long as they are secure in the knowledge that we're doing exactly what's best for them. And by we, I mean we and not some mom-and-pop cure-all for the common cold by a vegan who thinks drinking sperm is the answer, or that natural immunity is at all a viable alternative to our man-made, lab-certified rush job. Creating the cure was the easy part, actually. Very easy. We got the vaccine done and out within a 12-month time period, which beat out the previous quickest turnaround time for a vaccination since the mumps in 1960. So about 4 years, if we're keeping track. It was getting everyone to take it that was the harder ask. The idea was that everyone who could safely get the vaccination would get one and then become a card-carrying member of the Vax Club. No fuss, no muss. But we overestimated how enthusiastic the people would be for this cure, so we ended up coming up with some ideas around this little road bump with varying degrees of success. First off, we committed to releasing the full scope of our proprietary data related to this cure 75 years from now for transparency so that people would be confident in our cure. Next, with the help of comedians, we encouraged the public to take their medicine with a PSA from doctors from nearly every healthcare corner of the world.
Isn't that polio shot we gave your kid, and then your kid not getting polio? Well, those two things are related.
How about this? You do your job, I'll do mine.
Get the vaccine.
Get the vaccine.
Just get the vaccine.
Grow the up and get the vaccine.
And then we employed the use of former presidents Obama, Clinton, and Bush to help gain the public's trust in the vaccine by taking it themselves. We even contemplated offering a cash incentive. And then we tried to make it as convenient as possible for people to carry their vaccination passports. First, with the invention of the Vax vans, which were a moderate success. But then, in the same vein as the Pentagon detector chip from earlier, we developed another chip intended to store your Vax passport on so you could always have it on your person.
So I have a chip implant in my arm, and I have programmed the chip so that I have my COVID passport and on the chip. And the reason is that I always want to have it accessible. And when I read my chip, I just swipe my phone on the chip and then I unlock and it opens up. This is a PDF, which is my COVID passport. And this means that it's always accessible for me or for anyone else really who wants to read me. For example, if I go to the movies or go to a shopping center, then people will be able to check my status even if I don't have my phone.
All of which was super useful when we started limiting access of locations and services to only the vaccinated people. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how my company, Who Run the World, Inc., managed to completely eradicate this virus from the face of the earth. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, variants thereupon, and lizard people of all ages, I hope you were taking note of how we secure the survival and safety of our way of life during these unprecedented times. I know at times there were some hiccups and some silly moments, but rest assured, if you adhere to the mandates, get your vaccinations in order, and listen to the powers that be, we will weather this storm. Beautifully done. Paul Joseph Goebbels would be impressed, I must say. It only took a mere 2 years to turn a pandemic into a massive epidemic of social upheaval and uprising. Neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, family member against family member. All in the name of health, safety, and security. Well done. Those forces that be, radicalizing people to think that it would be permissible to temporarily discontinue their firmly held beliefs in universal healthcare for a sect of the population, a sect which they believe should just go and martyr themselves and be done with it. Temporarily suspend their firmly held belief in bodily autonomy and wish prosecution on the non-compliant simply for wishing to exercise their own bodily autonomy. Make the life of people who wouldn't fall in line lives a misery, even going so far as to stand on the graves of the deceased for their tragic death, mocking them for their decision to take their lives into their own hands, or even outright wishing a violent end to those who just simply won't comply. All of that, a distraction, if you will, as various corporate entities raise their prices behind the scenes and grow increasingly rich off of these circumstances. While you were off busy narking on your neighbors for breaking protocol, a politician responsible for implementing that protocol was also breaking it. The crackdown had to be done, and hard, if there was any hope of securing social dominance over the public. I mean, save the world from itself. Let me remind you, if you've forgotten, in the case of restrictions on your fellow man, people were forced to wear ankle monitors while in self-isolation. They were using COVID tracking data in more ways than just simply tracking COVID cases. People were penalized for not adhering to guidelines, arrested for not wearing masks, and children were even fined. Your companies were even photographing you every 5 minutes while you sat in the comfort of your own home. And 4 newborn infants died because of imposed travel restrictions. And if you were one of the parties that exercised your bodily autonomy by rejecting the vaccination, the Société des Alcooliques du Québec, or the SAQ, responsible for trade of alcoholic beverages in Canada, prohibited your access. Workers were let go, and if your boss suspected you of having forged records, suspected, not proved that you had forged records, you could be terminated with no unemployment benefits. Not even essential workers were safe from this, and they were certainly not to be exempted from the benefit denial suffered by those who rejected the vaccination. Landlords came into the fold, stating they would require records from new and existing tenants. They threw the idea of free and unmitigated healthcare as a human right out the window without a second thought and introduced a bill that would force people to pay out of pocket for COVID-related treatment at hospitals if unvaccinated, citing they must assume the risk of their own carelessness. Students were dropped from universities. Citizens were denounced as non-citizens by their own president, or straight up fined for not being vaccinated. Servicemen were threatened with the recoupment of bonuses and incentive pays for not being vaccinated, for not getting the vaccination. Parents had their rights stripped for being unvaccinated. Make-A-Wish children were denied a wish for not being vaccinated. They were denied critical medical procedures for not being vaccinated. They were even denied kidneys from their own fucking parents for not being vaccinated. And evicted from Ronald McDonald's house for not being vaccinated over a certain age. And if children were denied such things, it's safe to bet that adults were as well denied critical medical care for not being vaccinated. There was legislation out there that allows governors on a whim to indefinitely detain those who were non-compliant. They even found a way to get you as you were on your way out. While Grandma was left in her hospital bed dying alone because of the mandates preventing family from being with them in their final moments, protests spurred on by one man and his misfortunes at the knee of an officer raged with a vengeance across the world with the silent, kneeling support of the world's leaders, who allowed these gatherings en masse without a thought. But when the trucker convoy had had enough of all of this bullshit, no solidarity anywhere in sight. In fact, quite the opposite. Dare not to question the powers that be, folks.
Basically what they're telling us is you are an enemy of the state if you dare to oppose or even question the president, his administration, or his policies. Shut up. Step back, fall in line, or we're coming after you.
You traded your privacy, your autonomy, your ability to even speak freely and protest about this matter willingly for safety and security, for the warm blanket of authority to fall on you. blinding you to the harsh reality you have wrought upon yourself and your fellow human. And now that things have started to open back up, all of that effort, sure, it might have beaten the great and terrible Koof. But what did it cost? Your principles, for one thing. But now they know that they can get away with all of this. All of it for the sake of public health and safety. Who knows what happens next? But I don't think it's gonna be pretty.